Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
Welcome, listeners, and a change to our originally published episode. Those of you that have a fascination for voter ID and everything that comes with it, that one's going to be up in a couple of weeks. But we had an opportunity too good to miss as long-time friend of the pod, who we've not spoken to a while since he took on the dizzying heights and the role of Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire. So we are joined this evening by Terry Norton.
Evening. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to the show.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a while.
So it has been a while, and again, gone from the hurly-burly of local Portsmouth politics, thrown your net a bit wider into the whole of Hampshire in a whole new different dimension.
Absolutely, yeah. No, indeed. And we'll get onto that later, I'm sure.
Oh, yes.
It's there. So, Terry, would you mind introducing yourself, and if you wouldn't mind, then explaining the role of Police and Crime Commissioner and how that relates to the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner?
Absolutely. So I'm Terry Norton. I'm the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So I guess the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner is, it's been 12 years, I think it's probably worth saying, since they've been first introduced, to be the voice of the people and to hold the police forces across this country to account. And I think there's probably still some mystery around what they do and how they make communities safer. But effectively, they're responsible for the totality of policing and can be an excellent resource, I think, for communities to be able to drive change and effectively have their views heard. In Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, the Commissioner and I, for instance, we commission over £10 million on commissioned services to help support victims and fight crime. There's a whole load of things that we do. It's an elected position, and I'm appointed by her, and together we hold the chief to account and the police force and make sure that they're answerable to the communities that they serve. Now, there is a little bit of legal bit that I'll go into very briefly because I think it's probably worth doing, and that is under the terms of the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act of 2011. There are some things, just legal things that I think we can point on. So PCCs must secure an efficient and effective police force for their area. They appoint the chief constable and hold them accountable for running the force, and they can dismiss them, of course. They set the police crime and objectives, and they do that through a legal document. Ours in Hampshire is called More Police, Safer Streets, and that is basically your Bible, really. It sets out your mission and what you want to achieve through that police and crime plan. They set the force budget and determine the precept and how much that's going to be. They contribute, of course, or we contribute, of course, to national and sometimes international policing capabilities set out by the Home Office, but we bring partners together as well, and we do that through criminal justice partners and working with lots of different partners that build into policing. And I think it's probably fair to say that a big part of that is making sure that police can do the job that only the police do. A big part of my job is working with local authorities to tackle ASB and ask what they're doing in terms of prevention, working with the NHS to look at what they're doing, and those kind of partners in terms of making sure that the police can do the role that only the police can do. You don't need me to talk about the landscape of where we are, but 2 million people across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, a mixture of rural and urban areas. We've got big national parks, transport links, an airport, ferry ports, lots of different employers in terms of sectors and things like that. But a big demographic for us to cover through our policing and our governance of it.
Perfect. And you touched on it in your first answer there, Terry, and again, as an old friend of the pod, you know, we sometimes ask you the questions. You know, that the DPP role has not been without its controversy. The Police and Crime Commissioner is an elected role, but the deputy is selected by the PCC and doesn't go through a sort of open advertising process. Can you explain kind of why it's selected in that way, and you know why people, you know how you came to get the role?
Yeah, I mean, so the Home Office want PCCs. They appreciate the size of the role, and they do want them to have, deputies, and that can be done in different ways. It can be through chief executives or chiefs of staff and what have you. But the vast majority of, or a large amount, increasing number of PCCs are appointing deputies now because they realise the size of the role. And I know that the commissioner in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, Donna, wanted to be a really front-facing commissioner. To do that,
And at that point, is Terry's connection frozen for you too?
Yes, it has. Yep.
Okay, we'll just give Terry's connection a second to recover. Hopefully he'll be back with us shortly. So while we just wait for Terry's connection to recover, we had a contribution from Jake in comments, and it's like you read our we've got something along those lines coming up. So do keep listening. And we've got Terry back now.
Am I back?
You are back indeed.
You are indeed back. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't have the connection there. Where did I get to?
No,
quick turnaround.
You just said about Donna looking for it to be a forward-facing role, and that the majority of PCCs were working with a deputy.
Yeah, so I mean, Donna wanted to be front-facing. She wants to get out, speak to the public. A huge geography, 2 million people. To do that, I think you need some help. You need some support. And that person needs to be, symbiotic, I guess, with her vision, and it's effective and efficient that we're both on the same page. I mean, we work really long hours. We're very similar in terms of our output and wanting to get out and speak to people. But in terms of my role and what I do, I mean, my usual day consists of me supporting and sharing, Donna deliver her vision across the counties. But of course, that's done through travelling up and down the county, engaging with residents, working with partner organisations. My daily meetings are often about leading into the performance of the constabulary and the commission service, and looking at the grants that we provide, specifically those, or particularly those linked to young people with my background in education. But a large part of what we do is is working with partners, integrated care system, community safety partnerships, those in local government, to ensure that, again, the police can run an efficient service, but they're supported as well through additional systems. Of course, on top of that, I represent her locally, nationally, and regionally. But in terms of that role, it's like any role, really. I think you need somebody who's on the same page that you can work with. We don't have that American system where you kind of elect the president and the vice at the same time. But I think that's a good thing.
Perfect. Thank you, Terry.
Okay, thank you very much. So, and you touched on it in your opening remarks there, Terry, that with Hampshire being such a diverse county, we've got large cities, you've got quite large towns, but you've also got very rural communities. You've of course got the Isle of Wight as well. So, what challenges does that present from a policing perspective, and what sorts of differences are there for the types of crime that's occurring between those different environments?
Well, not only the types of crime, but I guess the types of policing. Of course, you have to work in a way where you are dealing with high harm first. Often a noisy, speeding vehicles on rural roads propose less threat than a missing child, or someone who's victim of rapes and murders and things like that. So you have to be able to deploy your resources, I guess, into your highest harm areas, but that doesn't mean that the public shouldn't have good neighbourhood policing and representation, and we're really committed to making sure that we have that, so that everybody across, regardless of whether you're in the tough areas within the cities or on the island or in rural communities, has that. It's easier on the Isle of Wight because you can give designated resources. We've recently invested in a designated road traffic policing unit for the Isle of Wight. And what the Isle of Wight doesn't necessarily have is that abstraction where you pull resources into major incidents and huge pieces of crime. But fundamentally, the public, many of them across Hampshire living in rural areas, want us to represent their needs, and they are often needs that are in their local locality and within the vicinity of where they live. So it'd be remiss of us not to focus on some of those things. And we've invested in drones, for instance, for rural areas, mounted police units to tackle some of those things. And we need to work with partners, of course, to look at some of the bigger rural crimes, tractor theft and red diesel, all those sort of things. But we do that. And, we hope to expand on, a model, a neighbourhood model that does that further. But when we came in, when Donna inherited the commissioner's role, it was fair to say that the force was a high harm force, dealing with those big major crimes first. On the back of uplift, of course, the government have pledged, part of their 20,000 extra police officers. Hampshire and the Isle of Wight had 498 allocated. The commissioner went further to make sure that we had an additional 102. So that's 600 additional police officers. And with the additional resources, with the additional police officers, we can now look at, saying, right, let's look at some of those lower category crimes. Let's look at the things that are most important to the public, as well as challenging some of those real high harm emergency issues that need attention immediately. But that more police, safer streets, that's the key to it. I think more police officers, meaning we can invest in some of the things that are really, really important to all communities. And of course, working with partners to make sure that ASB and things like that are not solely the police's responsibility.
Thank you.
Perfect, Terry. And one of those things that seems obvious to people is the changing landscape of physical policing. Over recent years, probably dozens of police stations have closed. We're aware. Both Simon and I are Cosham residents, and the Cosham police station has changed. Is this a trend that you see continuing? More consolidation into sort of larger purpose-built, larger centres, or is there some way that trend might be reversed?
Well, we're committed in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight to opening police stations, not selling them. Of course, some aren't fit for purpose, and you have to weigh up the cost of repairing a station based on what it gives. So we've got to look smarter, and we're looking at pop-up desks and opening stations where possible. Look, the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? We've got 600 additional police officers. They need to go somewhere. So it would be remiss of us to close, huge amounts of police stations and put them into big central hubs. I think based on what the public are telling us, that need for neighbourhood policing and that want for neighbourhood policing requires a different way of thinking things. We've recently brought in a new chief constable in Scott Chilton, who was sworn in only this Thursday. So I guess watch this space in terms of his vision and what he wants to bring in. But we got to look at how expensive things are. But our mission is to open police stations, not close them. Not maybe in the same way that the public have been used to over the years, because there are studies out there that say, how costly they're like libraries sometimes, aren't they? Police stations, or certainly front desks. Everybody wants them, but how many people use them? So we've got to be smart with how we do that. But if that's what the public wants, if the public want, Bobby's on the beat and they want somewhere where they can go in terms of reporting crimes, and that's what we will address and respond to, and that's what we're looking at. But we've got to think about cost as well, and we've got to look at, if a police officer is standing on a front desk all day with nobody coming in, would they be better off on the streets, patrolling, increasing police visibility and doing those things that the public want?
And that's an interesting point. Just to unpack that a little bit more, you touched there on the new Chief Constable, Scott, being sworn in, I think, only this week. So in terms of something like that, in terms of whether there's more localization or more centralization, is that a Chief Constable decision, or does that fit more in the realms of the sort of the Commissioner's office?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. Is the reality. We are that connection to the public, so that, we have to deliver on the public's priorities, and but we're not operational police officers. So in terms of logistics of that falls down to the chief and resourcing and things through their responsibilities. But of course, we set that priority. So it's a bit of both, and I think a good relationship, a good chief commissioner relationship, is one that goes hand in hand. I'm sure we'll have that with Scott, who is really on board with lots of the things that we're asking for. But yeah, a good relationship there. A bit of both is the answer to that. But fundamentally, I think it's the commissioner to set the priority and hold them to account if they're not achieving that.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. So a couple of weeks ago, I was one of the local residents that attended a public event at which Donna Jones, the Police and Crime Commissioner, was there, listening to residents, quite a few of the residents there, and we did an episode a few weeks ago where we played some interviews with them where they'd expressed concerns about actually getting hold of the police and the sorts of responses that they got, or I guess. If I paraphrase kind of the sense of priority and urgency around the things that they were reporting, one of them, for example, was sharing a situation where they were reporting some people looking a bit dodgy, looking at their car on their drive, and it turned out that those people actually came back the next night, broke into their neighbour's house, and stole their car. So it was kind of things like that. So there was a little bit of a theme to some of the frustrations from the local residents around reporting crimes and the level of consistency around the response. Wondered if you could talk to our listeners about what sorts of things are going to be being done to address those sorts of issues, because it's getting hold of the police, and indeed someone's just mentioning about in the comments about calling 999 several times and actually people not coming out. So what's being worked on in that space, please, Terry?
Yeah, so we have good stats in terms of 999, where there are potentially some issues. We're not quite where we'd want it to be is 101, and there are a number of reasons for that. One is the fallout from COVID. So in contact management, which is basically the call center, there were, during COVID, lots of people that couldn't work in their day jobs came into the 101 call center and worked for the police. So, for instance, the aviation industry, or in Southampton, for instance, the cruise ship industry had lots of people coming and working with us. Then, of course, lockdown restrictions were lifted. We got through COVID-19, and they went back off to their normal jobs. So getting out, leaving a gap, really, getting out and recruiting in those areas is something that we are pushing the force to do, and we're looking at ways of supporting them with that, including, I think, getting young people into that. So a big advert here. I think, to work in contact management, you effectively need to be able to type 50 to 100 words a minute. I think most young people can do that. It pays relatively well. So that's something that I would encourage people to look into. But we've got to work smarter as well, and we've got to look at, we've invested in app software and different ways of reporting, moving with the times. But we want to get that 101 right first before we really fly into that. Numbers in terms of the 600 police officers, absolutely, which is why we made the commitment around attending 100% of residential burglaries. We can do that now because of the numbers to be able to do that, and we hope that will grow. But we also need to take on a little bit of social responsibility as well, I think. And a large amount of the clogging up that happens there comes from people calling back for updates, and potentially, stringing drip feeding in bits of information, I guess, wanting that justice, wanting that police attention. So, there's something else to add. There's something else to add. There is an issue with persistent callers, and we need to do some work, including looking at how we support through mental health nurses. And we've got a designated team that work with our contact management to ensure that we can support with those suffering with their mental health. But of course, when you encourage people to report crime, then more will do it. More will report crimes. And there's also something called crime data integrity as well, which is about officers having to record historic crimes as well. So the role, I think, or the amount that officers are doing is growing. I think at the very least, we should expect work towards the public having a response. Be that written through email, and sometimes of course it's difficult to give an answer around a crime that's taken place immediately. But what we do want the force to be doing is coming back to the public long term. So if 6 months to a year down the line, you receive a letter saying, look, thank you for what you reported recently, that's now led to some sort of conviction, and it's a prolific burglar, and this is the situation. That make most people feel better. We see that in politics all the time, don't we? Sometimes people just want to have their say and they want that someone's listening. So yeah, there is.
So we've lost Terry again. Looks like we've lost Terry again.
We have seen Terry freeze at that point.
Yeah, I can see that his connection's dropped again. So we'll give him a moment to rejoin us. Hopefully his connection will recover, and he'll be right back in. And indeed, as I said, you saved us, Terry, because we were just about to have to start singing.
Sorry, chaps. I'm on a wired connection as well, so it shouldn't be dropping out. But
heck. Well, thank you for bearing with it and persisting there. We really appreciate that. Yeah, sorry. So there's multi angles really that you're looking at as to kind of the reasons and about the nature of the responses. I think if I may, some of the kind of the things that were raised, and I think there's a bit of a flavour of it in the responses that we're seeing in the comments is actually just kind of, I think some people are making, I think the hopefully the right call not to call 999 when it's not perhaps a crime underway, but I think it's the intelligence of the information that's being provided, the nature of that then not being as urgent a thing meant that, as example that I said there about a local resident, meant that the next night, unfortunately, a crime was committed and someone's car was stolen. Whereas, I guess hopefully I guess what the resident was hoping for was, had there been someone, had someone been around, then maybe they'd have been able to catch the perpetrators in the act, kind of thing. And I guess that's kind of what they're after. But
I think numbers are key to that, aren't they? The fact that we're boosting the numbers of police officers, because it's not that they're sitting around drinking coffee, it's that they are often out dealing with high harm situations, missing people, real serious violence. And also we've got to look at the way that crime has changed over the years. The likelihood of falling victim to a crime online or through fraud or something that is the highest that you're likely to see. You're far more likely to be a victim of a scam or a online fraud than you are to other crimes. But when we send police officers out, or when police officers go out to physical situations, lots of those are domestic abuses, and they're situations that do need police officers, to be there and to be dealing with it on the scene. We've looked at some of the bureaucracy as well that police officers have to do in terms of writing reports, and there's some stuff that we can do around voice dictation and software, and making it quicker for them to be able to do their role. But the key to it is numbers, of course. And that's what we're working on with a strong uplift program, which will continue to increase. And we're getting them through the door now. We're training those officers, and we'll see that going out to those kind of things, that preventative stuff, increase with the numbers.
Okay, well,
I think that leads us nicely into our next question, Terry, which is, often there's there's a sort of slight romanticism about there being a Bobby on the beat or your local community police officer. And again, it ties a little bit to that, the police stations. It feels like the police officers are only able to deal with, those urgent issues. What would you say to people who perceive that they are less safe now that very visible Bobby on the beat, it doesn't seem to be as prevalent?
Well, I think they are prevalent, just not in the way that we are used to. But society's changed as well, hasn't it? Young people, for instance, kids don't really hang out in parks and things anymore. They're not lit at times. And I have this huge thing about young people slightly going off around where they belong and not having a place to belong. Town centres have got spikes outside, so they can't congregate. Shops got one child at a time. Parks aren't particularly very well lit. And then we say we don't want them cooped up in their rooms, because of the online risk and things like that. So the patrolling police officer is a model that still exists. I go out with R&P and we absolutely see them going to hotspots and to areas where there is suspected crime. But for lots of people, they live in areas that don't have hardly any crime. And yet they still say, oh, I've not seen a police officer. We have those public police meetings a lot of the time. And they say, I've not seen a police officer for 10 years. And I said, well, you've got two here sat in front of you. They could be out, patrolling the streets, but they're here talking to you about what's happening and giving you an idea of the local picture. And that would be a concern, I think, where there are lots of crimes and you've needed a police officer. But if you live in a relatively safe area, I think the expectation to see a police officer regularly is quite a large one, and we don't need to look at what the community are doing as well in terms of their responsibility. And a big one of the things that always comes up is e-scooters and the frustration. People are furious about that controversial e-scooters and why are the police not confiscating e-scooters. And somewhere along the line, we've got to say, well, the parents need to stop buying them, don't they? Because we can't expect the police just to keep going around filling up vans full of confiscated e-scooters when you can buy them, freely. So there is a bit of social responsibility there. That being said, the public do want to see an increase in police visibility. With the numbers, that's something that we're committed to doing. The PCSO role is another one that I think can serve that, certainly when it comes to things like, I have this vision about policing in schools, and we've recently put money in place for brought back the schools liaison officers, so that there's that presence there in terms of prevention. But often online as well. I mean, we can all pick up our phones and find out what crimes are taking place in our area. Very few people do that. They want the police to tell them the volume of crime, and we've got to be a little bit smarter, I think, in terms of our investigative work, as a public to do our little bit of research as well to see what's going on. And where, of course, you live in an area where there are lots of reported crimes, then I would expect to see a high police presence. But many people will say they don't see police as visibly as they used to, and yet they won't really look at whether they live in an area of crime and things like that. And I stand outside, I've stood on my Hampshire Road, for instance, and had that 3 or 4 times someone say to me, I've not seen a police officer for years. And I've counted 3 or 4 police cars go past in the case of 10 minutes. So it's about the style, I think, which is really important to people. And we just don't have the resources, or, crimes change. Police officers standing on police corners to be a visible presence is probably a thing of the past.
And you touched on them there, and it's not something, but the PCSO role. I'm a follower of our local police on social media, and they regularly, name PCSOs who are. How does that differ from the police constable role?
Well, there's lots more that the police can do in terms of powers, but I think you could expect your PCSOs to have more time and the resources to be able to deal with some of that more neighbourhoody stuff. So, knowing where your teenagers are in terms of what school they go to, and knowing what they do in terms of where they're likely to hang out, and maybe some of their background sometimes. So that sort of lower level stuff, investing in communities, often falls down to them, and to be that visible presence, to be that that patrolling part, whilst police officers are off dealing with lots of the high harm stuff.
Oh, that's excellent.
You mentioned there, Terry, about people being updated with things that are going on in their area. Is there a way they can sign up for updates or something like that?
Well, yeah, well, you can quite easily see through Googling the police, Hampshire Police, your area. You can click on a map. You can look at the crimes that have been reported, and you can see the outcomes of many of those, whether they're ongoing or whether they've finished, but been concluded. But also, social media. We've got to look at social media and what's being promoted on there. Officially, from a police perspective, I think is important. Follow your neighbourhood policing teams. Look at what they're up to, because often they're working very, very hard. What they don't have time to do is to shout about it and to go out and tell everybody what they're doing. So let's use those tools, I think, is a good piece of advice and share those success stories. Let's not fall into the habit of just criticising the police. Let's celebrate the work that they're doing. The vast majority of police officers work really hard and do a fantastic job. What they might not have the time to do is to get out and let everybody know what they're doing.
Okay, so and thinking about the amount of crime that takes place, would you say it's the bulk of it is perpetrated by just opportunists, or is a large proportion of it committed by actually the same repeat offenders? Is it how does that kind of mix work?
Yeah, so reoffending is high, and there are high rates of reoffending. A large amount of crime is committed by reoffenders, and that's where we need to look at. For instance, with burglaries, for instance, I often ask the force, when's seasonal for burglaries? Is it summer when people have got their windows open and things like that, and they're advertising what's in their homes because of the weather and things like that? Or is it winter when it's darker and there are more places to hide and you can work in the shadows? They say to me, to be honest with you, Terry, it's more when we have a prolific burglar released back into community. And that's where you get the reoffending types. So that's where we need to look at the link between offending and prevention and what we do. And one of the things we do is we fund an IOM house or IOM houses, and they are integrated offender management houses, and they deal with people that have come out of prison, and that looks at educating them. It looks at helping them get into gainful employment and trying to steer them away from that kind of repeat life of criminality. And a large amount of the ex-offenders that come out and go into those those homes go into gainful or voluntary employment. So that prevention has to be better than cure. And we commission lots of work from charities and work with criminal justice agencies to support in this area, including we do a huge piece of work around trauma-informed practice and looking at why people commit crime in the first place. And often it links to behavioural habits and not knowing any different, growing up with, particularly when it comes to domestic abuse and things like that, growing up with that and not knowing any different. But also it's ACEs, adverse childhood experiences that lead, into that life of criminality. And we've recently funded a TIP program, trauma-informed practitioners who work with the police to look at the reasons behind perpetrators and their violence, because we appreciate we can't just support victims. We need to deal with the mushroom cloud which is happening behind, which is the reason why people commit crime. So we do a lot of work with commissioning, a lot of work with criminal justice partners to tackle that kind of thing.
Leading on from that, Terry, one of the things, and you touched there on people being critical of the police. I think the vast majority of the public have a lot of time and a lot of support for the police. But one thing that again, not speaking on behalf of all the public, but myself particularly, I read the local news, and regularly you see those repeat offenders, and often they're stood in court after, with offences dating back 18 months, 2 years, and that they've committed they're there for dozens of offences which have been proven, and their sentences seem to be a couple of weeks, a couple of months, or a suspended sentence. Is the criminal justice system giving the police the support it needs? And a second part of that question would be, how do frontline officers feel about, if I use that analogy, that they slap the cuffs on, and then 6 months later the courts wag a finger and tell them not to do it again?
Well, I think they're frustrated. I think it makes a mockery at times of what they want to achieve and what they are trying to do. But also it frustrates victims, doesn't it? And that's what we have to think about. We have to think about the victims. There it does. However, there are sentencing guidelines, of course, for judges, and they've got to do their job. So that's difficult. We can't just put people in prisons because they'll overflow. So we've got to look at support services. We've got to look at prevention. We've got to look at that restorative work as well. And I know in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, we do a really good piece of work. A lot of what we do is around, we have really good stats when it comes to out of court disposals, community remedies and community resolutions, which give the community and the victims a say in.
Giving the community a say, and at that point we lose Terry again. I don't know what it is, but it seems to his perhaps the connection gets to a point and gives up. So we while we just wait for Terry to come back in, our apologies to those of you following along. That there's that bit of interruption, and he's straight back in.
And I could hear you, so I'm happy to carry on as where I was, if that's okay.
Go.
Sorry, yeah. So again, we do a big piece of work around the community and make sure that they get a say. So they can. Often it's apologies, it's letters and things like that, but also about the courses and the work, the courses that the perpetrators go on, and that whole community element, giving back, that restorative element is really, really important. Of course, we can't flood the prisons. It is frustrating. I'm sure it is for officers. I liken it to education sometimes, when you have somebody in a school who is kicking off, swearing at teachers, being abusive, and the very next day they're back in front of that teacher in that class, and the teacher goes, well, what am I meant to do? I'm trying to, it makes a mockery of my authority and what I'm doing here. And the answer in education is often, well, you can't just have behaviour units for everyone that misbehaves, because they'll be full of people, and that's kind of the end of line, and they don't get to reintegrate. So yes, it is frustrating. Yes, I think police officers more than most, but we've got to look at public perception as well. And this idea of why don't the police officers just lock them up? It's bigger than that. You've hit the nail on the head. The police are as frustrated, if not more, than the public when it comes to sentencing, and that is because it kind of, they feel that they're going around in circles. They go, well, this person is going to go in front of a judge. They're going to be released. They're going to go back out. They're going to reoffend. We'll be picking them up again. Where's the justice there? But it's not really a police, it's more of a procedure thing rather than a police thing.
And the reason why I wanted to explore that, Terry, is because, for me, that it is something, when there was talk of, police cuts and there weren't enough officers. And I think everybody's very grateful for the fact that there are more police coming in, and you've mentioned that number of 600. But I think it is that element of, the burden of proof is understandably beyond reasonable doubt, and that is quite high. And I think that's where, for me, there does appear this disconnect at the moment, that where somebody isn't committing what I guess you would describe as high harm crime, they can almost commit an infinite amount of quote unquote low harm crime, like shoplifting or burglary, or breaking into people's outbuildings, that kind of thing. It almost doesn't matter. That can almost be a lifestyle choice for them, and ultimately the courts are never going to issue a substantive punitive sentence to take them almost to and it's not, it might sound like I'm going down the sort of punishment, lock them up, throw away the key, but there's an element of, I do wonder how much of police time is spent on those, those 20 or 30 known offenders which just keep coming around again.
Yeah, well, I think probably a large amount of police time is spent on those, but that doesn't mean that, just because we don't get an immediate answer doesn't necessarily mean that nothing's being done. It could lead to part of a bigger picture. I think where we've got to get better is that when we do have an outcome, when we do get a resolution, that we report that back so that all parties are, feel a bit better about it and feel reassured. I think it's difficult at times for police officers to, if there's a whole wealth of evidence, on something, they have to go through a system. It's not just the police ignoring it and not dealing with it. It's that they've got to put that together. It's got to go to court and all that sort of stuff as well. And I guess that it's the same with CCTV and things like that, Ring doorbells. It must feel, as a member of the public, it feels like you've got the evidence here. Just let's go and get that person. But that's a big, big piece of work to identify them, to locate them, to actually catch them and deal with that, and then go through the courts and prosecution and all that sort of stuff. But I guess there's some work to be done about that end result and coming back and informing people of that. And there's a part to play, I think, from partners as well. A lot of this is down to, not in the serious instance, of course, but a lot of ASB is fundamentally an authority responsibility. That's the local authority. And that's where, they need to step up, and the housing providers and health providers. And it's a broken window effect, isn't it? But I think far too often the police are expected to go and deal with everything, and to deal with, certainly antisocial behaviour, when there are partners involved as well. I welcome the Home Secretary's announcement into mental health provision and the millions, 140 something million into that recently, because I think she recognises that police are often picking up the pieces and dealing with the job that mental health providers and mental health provision should be gripping. And there are stories nationally. We're quite good at it in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight of mental health nurses going home on a Friday at 4:00 and having no choice but to say you're the police's responsibility until Monday morning. So then you've got police officers moving people from provision to provision, doing welfare checks. And what does that do for the victim? If you're having a mental health episode and a police officer, they're not inconspicuous, are they, police cars, pull up outside and those in uniform come and knock your door, that doesn't help anybody, does it? So there's a big part to play there. But in terms of getting back to your question about sentencing, and yeah, I think it probably does frustrate police officers. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. And I know that we can see some comments there about specific. Obviously, we're not going to ask you to respond about specific kind of situations, but I don't know whether that's something that you might have a chance to kind of visit afterwards and have a look at, see if there's anything to follow up for those people. But so moving on to our next question, we've got, so sadly with the recent high profile cases showing police officers abusing their position and assaulting women and girls, what's being done in Hampshire to protect the people the force is actually meant to be serving and keeping safe?
Well, I think vetting is the first hurdle to these situations, and making sure that the right people are appointed and that the standard is high across the board. I think is absolutely vital when it comes to these cases. In Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, we have a stringent vetting process, and we make sure that we get the right people through the door and that they're suitable to serve the public. Of course, in the Carrick and the Cousins situations that we've heard of recently that have been very well reported on, they're both from the Met, and there's something around the size of the Met there. It's a huge constabulary which is probably bigger than 4 or 5 times bigger than most. So there's some work to be done there about looking at maybe potentially that being broken down. If there's some cultural issues, which it sounds like there clearly are in the Met, then that needs to be addressed, and they need to look at their vetting and what they do in the same way that we do here in Hampshire. It's a bit of a political one as well when you talk about those high profile cases, because you had political parties that came out straight away and passed the buck and wanted to shift the blame. But fundamentally, the commissioner of the Met is Sadiq Khan. And, I've not seen a great deal from Sadiq Khan regarding these high profile cases. And that's where I'd be saying, look, as the Mayor of London, you are effectively the commissioner. What are you doing about these bad practices? I know that Sir Mark Rowley is doing a great job there. And I really do think, he is going about things in the right way, but it is a big beast. It is huge, and I think it's bigger than one person. In Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, certainly when it comes to serious sexual allegations, officers are immediately suspended, and we have it's called a confide in me system where officers can report a colleague for their behaviours. So I think we are in a good position in terms of that, but it doesn't affect the stain that it has on policing as whole. And we must remember that the vast majority of police officers do an honourable job. They run towards danger. They put themselves at risk, to help to protect people. There are, unfortunately, as we've seen recently, some bad apples, and that's that's where we need to look at vetting. We look at how we look at some of those cultures. But I'm assured that isn't the case in Hampshire.
Good to hear.
Yeah, looking at the Met there, Terry, I know Donna was on record as saying it just simply is too big. I think you said there it's about 5 times the size of any other comparable force. Do you see any changes? Mark Rowley obviously is almost feels like he's got the job to boil the ocean, and do you perceive any changes coming there?
I don't know. I is the honest answer to that. I don't know. I do think it's too big. I do think there's some work that needs to be done with the recruiting and the cultures that are there. But I think operational police officers would know much more about that than I do. So the honest answer is I don't know. I think it needs to be addressed, and if it carries on in terms of those high profile cases, they've got no choice but to really address that. But I would like the politicians who are effectively responsible for that to say a little bit more. We're talking about some really horrific situations, and using it as a political football to just I think the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper came out almost instantly and said, "What is the government doing about recruitment?" Well, we heard nothing from their commissioner. Our commissioner was talking about it more than they were, and I think Sadiq Khan and the Mayor of London in his role, they need to do more and say more on these issues and the cultures that are there.
Absolutely. So if we look at the funding of the police and the police precept that comes as part of the council tax bill, if this is going to increase again this year, what would you tell, the question is, well, what's that buying me? Where is my money going? What would you say to somebody asking that question?
Well, it's going to buy additional police officers. That's what it's going to. Simply, to get back to the levels or get to the levels that we want in terms of detection, visibility, we need the officers to do it. So the increase in the precept will give us additional police officers, 50, as a start. And in terms of the number, I think it's important to address it. If we had gone for it's 15%. We've gone for £15. Sorry, if we had gone for £10, it would have been swallowed up by inflation. So we have to look at what the public want, and in consultation with the public, we had over 8,000 responses to our public consultation. The majority of them saying that they would be happy to increase their precept if it meant more police officers and to pay a higher amount. I think with the for most, the increase is monthly is going to be pence more than pounds, and that's important. We appreciate it's a tough time for everybody. Our in the force, our gas and electric bills are going through the roof as well, and we need to make sure that we're acting on the public's priorities. And if that means making that decision across the country as well, it's probably fair to say, the vast majority of commissioners are increasing their precept to the highest possible amount. I think one is increasing it £14 rather than 15. Doesn't make sense, but it's for numbers. It's to be able to deliver the things that the public want, and of course, police numbers is key to that.
And that's officers on the street, is it? I'm presuming, rather than you know, in the desk.
Yeah, well, I mean, it can't all. Not every officer that you recruit it goes into neighbourhoods. You know, we spoke earlier on about the geography, didn't we, and what we need. But it will certainly buy into that vision of being able to get out and look at you know, investing in neighbourhoods and putting more police where the public want to see them, which is, you know, on the beat and things like that. Yeah.
You touched on it in your answer there, Terry. Obviously, you know, the cost of fuel, the cost of electricity, gas, you know, the availability of vehicles. You know, it feels at the moment that everything is making the landscape more challenging. In terms of, you know, Hampshire, you know, and the PCC office and the finances that controls, you know, how are you able to balance the budget and to make those numbers work? Or is it going to be, as we've seen in local councils, that some services will have to give to allow you to prioritise others?
Well, the short answer is by having a shrewd commissioner who comes from a banking background and is very, very good at maximising efficiency and bringing in money. We've got a good team here in the OPCC that lobby into the government for various funds and pots and things. We've recently set up a VRU, a violence reduction unit, which looks at the most serious violence in areas and targets where they are and puts in all the support for those areas. That's, you know, by applying for government funding, seeing what's out there and making sure that we get, you know, put good bids in there across the board. We've had to make some tough decisions our end as well. We've reduced the size of our office and, you know.
And hopefully he'll be straight back again. As
I guess we might want to observe whether perhaps more needs to be spent by the PCC officer on broadband. We might have to suggest that when Terry comes back.
Officer Broadband. He's right back.
And I could hear you. So yeah, I mean, it's a fair point, isn't it? We're not. I assure you, we're not on dial-up still. We haven't cut back that much. But yeah, so it's about being shrewd. It's about making sure that we're efficient with our money. Around £700,000 what we've saved in terms of, you know, we had to go for a restructure in the OPCC and make sure that we were, you know, saving as much money as possible. I view it as 50k per officer all in. You know, so for instance, we moved our office from Winchester, which was very, very nice on the high street, but it was very, very expensive. And by moving to a barn in, you know, around Fareham, we've managed to save 150k, and that's 3 officers. That's the way I see it. So we've got to be careful of our, you know, with what we're doing. We're going to make sure that we're efficient and we're all over the finances. I wish we were in a position that local government is often in, where you can look at income generation and you've got the general power of competency to be able to sell off, you know, potentially use investments to bring money into police estate. We're not there, but you know, we've got income generation is quite difficult, so we've got to look at making sure that we're efficient, that we're applying for the pots of money where they're there, and we've got a strong team in the OPCC that do that very, very well, enabling us to do some of the things that others simply can't.
Excellent. So Simon, in amongst our comments there, do we have any questions pop up? I'm never certain when I look at comments whether there's
Well, there were some that I think it's probably, to be fair to Terry, it's better that he possibly follows them up offline rather than kind of put him on the spot. I think there's some issues raised there about lack of response to emails, and I mean, you mentioned it yourself, Terry, about submitting CCTV. There's some comments there about some CCTV you know, being submitted but kind of not hearing anything. So I think that kind of speaks to one of your responses where people have perhaps sent stuff in and perhaps not heard something back.
And we will, Simon, we will look into those. I assure you, we've got, you know, myself, we've got a team here that will look into casework and chase that up, and we will do that.
No, that's fantastic. We didn't realistically expect you to be able to pop up an answer right away to these things. It's reasonable for you to be able to get back to these people. Obviously, you can contact them through the chat on the Facebook, yeah. So there's some basic questions around those. So and indeed, someone's just put their contact details on there, so that makes that a bit easier. But that's kind of the general thing. I think the overall theme from the comments, if I may, was tremendous amount of respect for the force. it's just the sheer numbers. And as you were saying yourself, as the numbers are building, that allows you to do more. Is that kind of really the theme that you'd want to kind of assure people with?
I think that's absolutely it. I mean, crime is on in areas on the up, certainly how in terms of statistics and how it's reported and things like that. So, we have to, fundamentally, the officers across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight do a fantastic job. And back to that running towards danger, they do a really, really good job. Where I think they probably we need to look smarter is telling people about the job that they do. But it's not through people sitting in cars or police stations. They're out there dealing with real high harm, often category 1, really, really, you need to deal with this right away because it's a missing child or it's an assault taking place immediately and that sort of stuff across the board. And I have the utmost respect for police officers and the job that they do.
As I'm sure we all do. It's not something I could do. So you have to have that, like you say, running towards danger isn't something we're all equipped for.
Absolutely. So Terry, if we look ahead to the next year, what are the things that you're working on that you're most excited by, that you think are going to make a real difference?
Well, we've got the new chief coming in, isn't it? So I'm really looking forward to seeing Scott Chilton's vision and how he's going to put that into action. We've got our estates program continues. Yeah, so what's his space in terms of what we can do there. I personally am really starting to see an increase in the work that's going on with young people, not just the services that we commission and the VRU that I've recently mentioned, but the work that happens in schools and around educating young people and having a police presence where needed there. And then, of course, next year we're up for re-election, but mainly it's those police officers, seeing those police officers out and about, seeing that presence increase, listening. Again, I love speaking to the community and engaging with people, and starting to see that come into fruition is fantastic. I think, as dare I say, for any councillors that are watching, I think you have a vision. When you get into local government, you have this vision of changing the world, and quite quickly you're brought down to earth in terms of what you can achieve and what you can realistically, deal with, particularly when you're in opposition. With the policing world, thankfully, I really am starting to see some results moving quite quickly, and that's great. So long may that continue.
And the Police and Crime Commissioner hustings were probably our most viewed episode from a few years ago. So we'd love to have yourself or Donna back next year, depending on who's standing. And thank you for giving up your Sunday evening and giving us a real insight into the role and some of the stories behind the headlines.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guest has been
Terry Norton, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight.
And I've been Simon Sainsbury, and please do make sure to join us next week at 6:27 when we're looking at the result of Portsmouth City Council's full council budget meeting. So we're looking at how that goes in our full council report. And then the week after, we are definitely going to be having that much promised episode looking at what ID you're going to need to take with you to vote in person on the 4th of May. So please do make sure, follow, subscribe, wherever you find us, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, etc., so that you can make sure you get to hear about our show. And thank you very much for all of our contributors in the comments this evening. It's been great to see those. Join us next week, 6:27.